Ordinary citizens with jobs, families, and routines who simply stopped existing one day. Local police departments had investigated each case independently. None found evidence of foul play in the traditional sense. No signs of struggle, no abandoned vehicles, no financial activity suggesting flight. Just absence. Complete and inexplicable absence. What connected these cases was geography. Nearly all the missing individuals lived or worked along routes serviced by the same municipal waste management contractor, a company called Regional Sanitation Solutions, operating under legitimate city contracts in multiple jurisdictions. At first, investigators dismissed the connection as coincidence. Waste management companies service millions of homes and businesses. Statistical overlap was inevitable. But when analysts mapped the disappearances against collective, a disturbing pattern emerged. The timing was too precise. People vanished within hours of scheduled pickups, not days, hours. The United States Marshals Service was brought in when the investigation expanded beyond local jurisdictions. Their fugitive task forces had the authority and resources to coordinate across state lines. And what they found suggested something far more organized than anyone had anticipated. Regional Sanitation Solutions was not a typical waste management company. On paper, it held contracts worth millions of dollars with cities and counties across 3 states. Its fleet included over 40 vehicles. Its payroll listed hundreds of employees. Its facilities met every regulatory standard. But beneath that legitimate exterior, something else was operating. Financial investigators traced unusual cash flows through the company's accounts, large payments arriving from shell corporations with no identifiable business purpose, expenditures that did not match operational needs, equipment purchases that exceeded any reasonable interpretation of normal maintenance. When agents began surveillance on key facilities, they noticed another anomaly. Security at the main depot was excessive for a garbage processing center. Armed personnel patrolled at odd hours. Cameras covered every angle. Vehicles entering certain loading bays were shielded from outside observation. All of this for a company that supposedly handled nothing more valuable than municipal waste. The marshals obtained warrants for electronic surveillance. What they intercepted confirmed their worst suspicions. Coded communications referenced shipments that did not correspond to any legitimate contract. Personnel discussed timing windows with military precision. And repeatedly, conversations mentioned the compactors in terms that had nothing to do with waste processing. For nearly 6 months, investigators built their case in silence. They identified key operatives within the organization. They mapped routes and schedules. They coordinated with local law enforcement without revealing the full scope of the investigation. And they prepared for an operation that would require overwhelming force and absolute precision. The depot itself covered nearly 12 acres of industrial land, multiple structures, dozens of vehicles, underground storage areas that did not appear on any official blueprints. Taking it down would require coordination between the Marshals Service, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, local tactical units, and specialized forensic teams capable of processing what everyone feared they would find inside. When the order finally came, more than 200 federal agents were positioned across multiple entry points. Air support circled at a distance, ready to intercept any vehicles attempting to flee. Communications were jammed to prevent warning calls. Every route out of the facility was blocked. At exactly 3:17, the breach began. The first teams moved on the main administrative building. Flashbang grenades shattered windows as agents poured through doorways. Inside, employees scrambled in confusion, some attempting to reach phones, others simply freezing in place. None offered physical resistance. Within minutes, the building was secured and 14 individuals were in custody. Simultaneously, tactical units hit the vehicle bays where garbage trucks sat in neat rows awaiting morning routes. Agents found nothing unusual at first, just standard municipal vehicles with standard equipment. But when forensic specialists began examining the compactor mechanisms, the picture changed rapidly. Trace evidence of human biological material was detected in multiple units. Blood, tissue, hair. The remains had been cleaned, but not thoroughly enough to defeat modern forensic technology. Field commanders immediately called for additional processing teams. What had begun as a raid was becoming a recovery operation. The most disturbing discoveries came from a secondary structure at the rear of the property. Officially listed as a maintenance facility, the building was secured with reinforced doors and electronic access controls, a legitimate repair shop would require. When agents finally breached the interior, they found a space that resembled something between a medical facility and a storehouse. Stainless steel surfaces, drainage systems built into the floor, refrigeration units, and compactor equipment modified in ways that served no legitimate industrial purpose. Human remains were recovered from 3 separate compactor units. Forensic teams worked through the night, documenting evidence, collecting samples, and attempting to identify victims whose bodies had been deliberately destroyed. The process would take weeks. Initial estimates suggested at least a dozen individuals had been processed through this facility, though the true number might never be known. As investigators secured the scene, they began piecing together how this operation had functioned. The criminal network had exploited the invisible nature of waste management. Garbage trucks traveled every street in America. They stopped at every home and business. No one questioned their presence because no one paid attention to them. Victims were selected through a process that remained under investigation. Some appeared to have for personal reasons, disputes with individuals connected to the network. Others seemed to have been witnesses to activities they should never have seen. A few may have been entirely random, people who simply encountered the wrong person at the wrong time. Once targeted, victims were intercepted by operatives posing as sanitation workers. The abductions occurred in broad daylight, during normal collection hours, with witnesses assuming nothing more unusual than a worker taking a break or speaking with a resident. Within minutes, victims were inside vehicles designed to contain them. Within hours, they were at the depot. What happened next was designed to leave nothing behind. The modified compactors were capable of reducing human remains to fragments small enough to mix undetectably with processed waste. That material was then distributed across multiple landfills, buried beneath thousands of tons of legitimate garbage where excavation would be functionally impossible. The system was horrifically efficient, and it had operated for years without raising suspicion. In the immediate aftermath of the raid, federal authorities faced the enormous task of unwinding a criminal enterprise that had embedded itself within legitimate municipal infrastructure. Arrest warrants were executed across multiple states. Employees at every level of regional sanitation solutions were questioned. Financial records were seized and analyzed. The owner of the company, a man who had presented himself as a successful entrepreneur and civic leader, was taken into custody at his residence. His home, valued at over $3 million, contained evidence of extensive criminal activity, including coded communications, financial records detailing payments for services that could only be interpreted as murder for hire, and documentation linking him to organized criminal networks operating internationally. Investigators discovered that the sanitation company had functioned as a dual operation. Legitimate waste management services provided cover and income. The criminal side handled problems for clients willing to pay substantial fees for permanent solutions. Those clients included individuals connected to drug trafficking organizations, organized crime families, and in at least one case, a foreign national with suspected ties to hostile intelligence services. The scope of the conspiracy expanded with each passing day. Additional facilities in other states were identified and raided. More remains were recovered. More arrests were made. Federal prosecutors began assembling cases that would take years to fully adjudicate. For the families of missing persons whose cases had gone cold, the investigation brought terrible change. DNA evidence eventually confirmed the identities of several victims, allowing families to finally know what had happened to their loved ones. For others, the uncertainty continued. Not all remains could be identified. Not all victims could be conclusively linked to the network. Law enforcement officials emphasized that this case represented a new category of threat. Criminal enterprises had learned to hide within systems that society depends upon but rarely examines. Waste management, logistics, infrastructure. The very invisibility that made these services convenient also made them vulnerable to exploitation. The United States Marshals Service coordinated with municipal governments across the country to implement new oversight protocols for contracted services. Background check requirements were strengthened. Facility inspections became more rigorous. Reporting unusual activity that might previously have gone unnoticed. But officials acknowledged that no system could be made completely immune to infiltration. The lesson of this case was not that garbage trucks were dangerous. The lesson was that any system operating below public attention could be weaponized by individuals willing to invest time and resources in exploitation. Federal prosecutors ultimately secured indictments against more than 40 individuals connected to the network. Charges ranged from racketeering and conspiracy to multiple counts of murder and obstruction of justice. Several defendants entered cooperation agreements, providing testimony that helped investigators understand the full scope of the operation. The primary organizers of the network face sentences that effectively guarantee they will spend the remainder of their lives in federal custody. Asset forfeiture proceedings recovered tens of millions of dollars in property, vehicles, and financial holdings. The sanitation company itself was dissolved. Its contracts transferred to legitimate operators under enhanced oversight. For the agents who executed the raid and processed the evidence, the case left lasting impressions. Many had spent their careers pursuing violent criminals, drug traffickers, and fugitives. Few had encountered anything that matched the calculated horror of what they found inside that depot. One senior investigator, speaking on background, described the case as a reminder that evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind the most ordinary things. Sometimes it drives trucks we see every day and never think twice about. And sometimes the only thing standing between that evil and more victims is the willingness of law enforcement to follow patterns that do not quite make sense, even when the trail leads somewhere no one wants to go. The investigation remains partially ongoing. Authorities believe additional victims may yet be identified as forensic analysis continues. Witnesses are still coming forward with information that may expand the scope of charges. And in cities across America, municipal officials are reviewing contracts and oversight procedures with new awareness of vulnerabilities they never previously considered. What happened at that depot was not the product of a single criminal mind. It was a system built over years, refined through experience, and designed to exploit the blind spots in American infrastructure. Taking it down required coordination across dozens of agencies, thousands of investigative hours, and the courage to pursue evidence wherever it led, even when what waited at the end defied comprehension. The message from federal authorities was clear. Networks that believe they operate beyond reach of American law enforcement will eventually discover their error. The resources, technology, and determination of agencies like the United States Marshal Service exist precisely to pursue threats that believe themselves invisible. For the families who finally received answers about missing loved ones, the resolution brought grief alongside relief. The not knowing had ended. The horror of knowing had begun. But at least the truth, however terrible, had finally emerged from the places where criminals had tried to bury it forever. And for the communities served by that sanitation company, life slowly returned to normal. New trucks appeared on familiar routes. New workers performed familiar tasks. The garbage was collected, just as it always had been. But something had changed. Awareness, perhaps, that the systems we depend upon require vigilance. That trust must be verified, not assumed. That even the most mundane parts of daily life can conceal threats capable of destroying everything they touch. The depot stands empty now, sealed behind warning tape and security barriers. Forensic teams have completed their work. Evidence has been cataloged and secured. The compactors that once served as instruments of horror have been dismantled and destroyed. What remains is documentation, thousands of pages of evidence that will support prosecutions for years to come. Testimony from cooperating witnesses that will help juries understand how such a system could exist. And the names of victims, finally recovered from anonymity, finally acknowledged as people who mattered, whose disappearances were not mysteries but crimes. The United States Marshal Service continues its mission. Fugitives are still tracked. Warrants are still executed. Justice is still pursued across every jurisdiction where federal authority extends. And somewhere, in offices and operations centers across the country, analysts continue watching for patterns that do not quite fit, anomalies that suggest systems are being exploited, signs that somewhere, somehow, criminals believe they have found a place to hide. They are wrong. They are always wrong. And eventually, in the early hours before dawn, convoys will roll toward wherever they believe themselves safe. The breach will come, the evidence will be seized, and the truth, however long it takes to surface, will finally emerge into the light where it belongs.
This shampoo will make your hair grow, even where you didn't have any before. Just be careful not to use it too often because it makes your hair grow fast. My friend who is a doctor recommended it to me. If you have fine hair, yes, it's I only used it for 2 weeks and my effect was shocking. It contains rose oil which are very effective for hair loss and cracks. If you use it for a period of time, you will not only reduce hair loss, but also get a lot of small growth